For all those players playing at a higher difficulty, or maybe you're trying to venture into the Masters and the Legend levels of difficulty, this video is for you. It's all about wind, it's all about lie ranges, and trying to calculate all those, because on the Legend and Master difficulty, you can't see the actual numbers that the easier difficulties can actually see. So I'm going to give you a couple little tips here, a couple little tricks. It's not going to be a very long video. So let's dive right on in. Do not forget to like, do not forget to subscribe. That's all that I ask. When it comes down to this, I just got my greenskeeper here. I'm going to just play through a round, and I'm going to give you guys a key here to start. Let's start with wind, because wind is super easy. And one of the things that I can always recommend is play around and understand things for you actually, right? So understand how things actually work by playing around on an easier difficulty. That will help you guys out a lot. So let's first start out with this key here. You can see the wind meters. I got a bunch of different wind meters here, and normally when you play on the higher difficulties, you can't see the numbers as talked about. What you can use is behind the arrow, there's an actual colored circle. You can see here the circles, and I've left the numbers there so you can see them and apply to them. A half-filled circle is about an 11 to 12 mile per hour. You're always going to have the arrow, which is great, but you won't have the physical number. So use that half-filled circled number. It can range, obviously, it can fluctuate a little bit, but usually the half-filled is somewhere between 11 to 12, 13 miles an hour, somewhere between that range. So then you can easily add and subtract based on how full this circle actually is. And you can easily get used to this by just playing around with the actual meter on a certain, wind that you're expecting to play on, and just see where the meter is at 15 miles an hour, at 17 miles an hour, at 7 miles an hour. So a good gauge for me is I like to break it into a little bit quarters. Half is I do 12 miles an hour, 3/4 full, I do 17 miles an hour, a quarter full, I do 7 miles an hour. So that's really just like the rough estimates that I like to play with. And obviously anything really low, you can see there, I treat it as like 1 to 2 miles an hour, pretty much nothing. So very easy. And now you can obviously see here, I have it on so that way you can see we have a 16 mile an hour wind. It's above the half-fold threshold, so you can easily figure that one out. Now that you know about wind, let's talk about lie. Now, lie is a lot more difficult when it comes to builds, because each build is a little bit different. And in this situation, I have my greenskeeper out, which has, I believe it's a 43 recovery. So it's extremely low recovery. And obviously, if you get higher recovery attributes, then your lie variance, your percentage, is going to be much less decreased. You're also going to get better lie percentages out of these situations. So it's definitely beneficial to increase your recovery ratings. Now, I'm going to blow this up here in the bottom right, because this can be very difficult when it comes to the Legend and the Master ratings, because they want you to understand like what's happening in the photo is going to determine, right? So like you can't see any part of this golf ball. So if you're actually playing golf in real life and your golf ball is pretty much buried like this all the way down to the bottom, you're pretty much not going to be able to get it out at all. So there's two things you really need to pay attention here to kind of get your percentages accurately as possible. One is, what club are you using when it comes to this? The game's always going to preset you with whether it's like a splash shot out of the bunker or a pitch shot, it's always going to preset you with the highest percentage lie. So in this situation, it's giving me a 60-degree wedge because I'm not that far from the green, and it's giving me the approach shot, and that's going to give me the highest percentage, right? So like there's other shots that you can hit. Pitch shot, it's going to get me down to an 87%. Flop shot, 89%. They're not as high as other shots. Even if you take like a pitch shot and then you clubbed up, you can see the percentages drop. So just note, when it presets you a club, it's presetting you the best percentage for that actual lie. So just note, if you deviate from the recommended club, you're dropping your percentages, and you need to calculate that in. The second thing you need to pay attention to is, what club are you actually using? For instance, wedges are always going to get through rough and tougher situations a lot better than anything else. This is a perfect example, right? If I'm hitting a 60-degree wedge, because it can cut through the grass much easier, it's going to be able to get out at a 94%. If you haven't seen my video on what true lie percentage actually is between the variants here, go check that video out. Now, as I scroll up, you can see the numbers and the percentages are dropping drastically here. right? Because these are more de-lofted clubs. They don't get through the rough as well, and it's going to continue to drop the percentages as quickly as possible. So similarly, what I said with wind, you kind of should just play a round with this on and get used to these images and used to your recovery rating, so that way you understand what that image means to what your normal percentages are for your guy. But some quick math that you can do here for it. When it comes down to any wedges, you can pretty much account for them to be in a 90% at least distance spot. I never really see anything unless, like I said, you deviate really far, like you're in a wedge spot and you go all the way to a wood spot, you can still see 70%. And this is a 43 overall recovery. So at minimum, you can always play the distance to be 70%, but we're trying to be as accurate as possible. So pay attention to the actual club that you're using, and then let's give us some more examples here. So obviously I'm using a wedge here so I can get 90%, and it's all going to be about how much of the ball you can actually see. For instance, even though I'm in this bush, now I see more of the ball. I'm still using a wedge, but if I was saying I'm hitting a 7-iron, you can use how much of the ball is visible as like a close estimate, right? So I use the 7-iron as a reference a lot of the time as an actual percentage of what we're like looking for. This would be like a 50%, but in this situation, I've never really see anything where the top variant is below 70%. I've never seen anything below that. Now that could just be me, but this is a 43 overall recovery, and I never really see that. I've done it on multiple courses. If you have, you might have found something that I haven't found, which is perfectly acceptable, as I have not, probably played the different varieties as everybody else has. So what I'd like to say is if the ball is half visible or 3/4 visible, you can account that for a high 80s%. From 7-iron lower. And when I say lower, I mean like 7-iron, 8-iron, 9-iron, all the way down to wedges. I don't mean the opposite direction. If you go anywhere from 7-iron or higher, 6-iron, 5-iron, wood, then you need to play for these percentages as half of the ball being visible in the 70% range. That is pretty much like a good rough estimate that you can always account for. So we can get into the bunker as well, and it will be very similar aspects of it. And obviously, if you're ever in the fairway, it's always 100%. I shouldn't have to tell you guys that. That's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously here, it says 99%, but it's pretty much 100% of the actual number. Now we go in the bunker here, and it's very similar, right? So they're going to give you the preset of the actual number that is best suited. Now, when it comes down to this one, I can see it's about 2/3 of the ball here. So this is, like I said, an 80% range shot in which you can account for these. And if you deviate, like you go to a 9-iron, you can see percentages drop drastically the further away you deviate from. So this is the worst extreme one that you're probably ever going to see, is where like no part of the ball is visible and you are still with a wedge at 80%. So when it comes down to it, like I said, you can still, if you're still seeing, some part of the ball with all wedges, you can pretty much play them to an 80%, but just note, if you do deviate from it, so let's go to a deviation of it, right? Still in a decent spot. And it's obviously, this can all depend on the course and how it's built and the rough and how it goes. But when it comes down to it, you can always play a minimal threshold of 70%. And then anything with a wedge, you can do 80% or higher. So that's pretty much like, it gets a little choppy, it gets a little rough. I wish the images actually portrayed better percentages when it came down to it. I think there's just a lot of variance when it comes down to the attributes and pretty much all the system. But play around with your player, pay attention to the images that are displayed down in the bottom, and then look at the percentages that are tied to it on these easier difficulties. And so that way, when you get to the Masters and you get to the Legend level, that image means this percent. That image means this percent, because it's going to differ depending on how high your attribute points are. It may not be these exact numbers for me. I'm just using this example as an extremely low overall recovery rating player, so that way you guys can see a wide variance of a lot of things. So play around, easy settings, get used to these images. At minimum, always play 70%. Anything with a wedge or pretty much a low 9/8 iron, you can play 80% or higher. And then it really just determines like how much of that ball is actually visible. Don't deviate from the pre-selected shot. If you can, that's best for you. All right, catch you guys in another. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.